You want to learn how to knit, you don't know where to start. Don't worry, I've got you. I am a knitter, a project bag designer, and a fiber artist business. And today we are going to walk through how you get started with knitting, from choosing the right yarn and the right needles to getting that first row started. Before we dive in, I want to take a look at some options for yarn. So when you go to start knitting, you walk into a Joann Fabrics, a Hobby Lobby, or you could even go to specific yarn stores or yarn and fabric stores. And there are so many options. And it's very challenging to know what to choose or even what format of yarn works for you. And so I grabbed 3 examples from my own yarn that give you a pretty good spectrum of how yarn comes when you buy it. So the most common kind that you'll probably see at most stores is this. It comes as a ball of yarn or like a little cake of yarn. Now, again, this is a higher end workhorse brand that I bought at a yarn store, but it's a pretty good example of a ball of yarn that you would work with. Sometimes when you go to a yarn store, you may find one that looks like this, and this is what's called a skein of yarn. This is a length of yarn that has been twisted up on itself and then had the end tucked in, and you usually cannot work directly from these. You have to wind them into a ball or some other shape before you can get started with knitting with these. So you'll see this a lot if you go to like a festival or an event where they're selling yarn, or if you're buying directly from a farm. But just know that if you're just getting started, you are going to have to actually wind this into a ball before it is usable. The third kind, and this is a loose version of what's called a hank of yarn. And so oftentimes you'll see it's a little bit looser. It's kind of in that elongated form. Oftentimes there's an end of yarn in the middle there that you can pull from. So these are the 3 most common styles or types of format you can buy your yarn in. And so this one, again, you'd probably want to wind up. You see this one's really loose. It's also been in my storage for a while. It takes a little preparation before you get started. So when we're looking at yarn, first we want to look at the format that our yarn is in to make sure it works for us. And so for us, I don't feel like winding yarn today, so we're actually going to work from this ball of yarn. And that's because we can pull directly from the center here and work pretty easily from that. So once we have our yarn, we need to figure out what needle size. So knitting needles come in a wide variety of sizes, from very small to very large. Now, most people mistakenly think that the needle size only determines how big your project is, but your yarn actually determines what is the most beneficial needle size to use, because if you use a needle that's too small, your knitting is going to be so tight that you're going to get a cramp in your hands. If your needle is too big, it's going to be very loose, it's going to be very drapey, but it might not be very warm or resilient. So when you are looking for the knitting needle, what you're going to want to do is look at the tag of your yarn. So oftentimes it'll give you some information. So it's going to give you the weight of the yarn. So this is 100 grams, and then the length. So 100 grams and 219 yards. Now, if you don't know anything about yarn, that probably means nothing to you. But to me, this means that this is a worsted weight yarn, which is a nice mid-weight yarn. And usually from there, I can choose my needle size. But for the purpose of this video, what we'll do is we'll take a look. So our tension is how many stitches we should have over 10 centimeters. So we should have 20 stitches over a 10 centimeter square, okay? And so we would use that to check it later on. And then finally, the needle size. So almost everything in yarn should tell you a recommended needle size. This helps you choose your selection very easily. So here we have a 4.5 millimeter, or a US size 7, or a UK size 7. Now, US and UK needles are different sizes, but typically if you go with the recommended needle size, you are going to get the best feel of fabric out of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go grab some size 7 needles, take a look at our needle options before we get started. Okay, so the next step then is to get our knitting needles. There are, in general, 3 different styles of knitting needles. We have our straight knitting needles. So these are the most common ones you'll see in cartoons or books. These have a point on one end and usually a rounded part or a cap on the other. We have our circular knitting needles. Now these can come in a variety of styles. They can come in fixed, so it's just the circular needle is what it is. They can come in interchangeable, where you can actually unscrew and change the size of the needles. And they can come in metal or wood or bamboo. And same with any of these needles can come in a variety of materials. They can come in plastic, they can come in wood. These are bamboo, these are bamboo, these are nickel. So choose whichever material feels best for your hand. I typically like the nickel better because I tend to have a pretty tight grip, and I bend to the bamboo and wooden needles. The other primary option are what are called double pointed needles. So you'll see these, a lot of times when people are knitting things in the round. So like a sleeve or parts of a sweater or a hat or socks. They're typically sold in sets of 5. And you can see they have a point on each end. It's just another way of going around in a circle without having to use a circular knitting needle. So those are the 3 types of needle options. Now, out of these 3 types, again, today we are just going to focus on the straight knitting needles. We're just going to go with a super basic getting started today. We are going to learn how to do a slip knot. We are going to learn how to do what is called a knitted cast on. And then we are going to knit our first few rows, and then we are going to learn how to purl our first few rows. And at that point, you will know everything you need to about how to get started with knitting. So let's dive in with our ball of yarn and our straight knitting needles. Okay, so I have found the end in the center of my yarn. Ignore the mess. I did that off camera because I am garbage at finding that. So nobody needs to watch that. But what we're going to do is we're going to create our slip knot. And so the way I like to create them is I take my yarn and I loop this around and I kind of pinch it with these fingers and I hold my loop open, and through this loop I grab the rest of the yarn that's hanging down and I pull it. So we've got this right here. Okay. And so that's our slip knot. And then we stick our needle inside there and we just pull it tight. There we go. We have our slip knot. Every time you get started with a knitting project, you're going to start with a slip knot. That's it. Now there are all kinds of different cast-ons. You'll see videos for all of them. What we are going to do is what's called a knitted cast-on. I like this because it teaches you the knitting stitch as you're getting started. So we get some like immediate dopamine hits and progress as we're getting started. So how we're going to do this is you always hold the existing yarn and needle in your left hand for right-handed knitters. You hold it in your left hand here, and we're going to be creating new stitches with our right hand. So when we are knitting, we want to go in from the bottom front and out and up in the back. Okay, so in from the bottom, up and out, so we make an X. Then from that X, we're going to take our yarn that's hanging down. You see this guy here? We're going to come up between the 2 needles and over the back of the right hand needle. And what we're going to do is we're going to pinch it tight there, because then we're going to do this really fun trick of trying to back this out. So you'll see there's a little bit of space here, and we're going to take our right needle, whoops, went off camera. We're going to take our right needle, and we're going to go back down through that space. So we caught that loop. Man, I keep moving it. We caught that loop on our right needle. We take it back down through that space. So now we have a loop on our left and a loop on our right. And so for casting on, we're going to then just move that loop from our right needle to our left. Okay, so now we have 2 stitches. So now we're going to cast on another one. So let's do this again. So we're going to go from the bottom up and out the back. We're going to take our yarn up between the 2 needles and over the back of the right. And then we're going to hold it against the right needle here a little snugly. And then we're going to take the tip of the right needle. We're going to guide it with our left pointer finger back down and out the way it came. See? So now it caught this loop. And now we have 3 loops. So we're going to do that again. So up through the front, out through the back. Bring this yarn up between our 2 needles, over the back. Hold it a little snug with our right finger. Push our needle back out with our left pointer finger, pull it through, and then just move the loop to the left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast on about 15 of these, and then we'll come back and I will show you how we then move on to knitting our first row. Okay, So we have 15 stitches on here. I did my knitted cast on. So you'll see our short end where we started our row is over here, and our long end attached to the ball should always be hanging out by the needle tip. So now we're gonna knit our first row, and this is gonna be a little bit different than the knitted cast on because we're not gonna switch things back to the left needle. So again, if we're knitting like a right-hander, we're gonna start with the needle with our project on it, always in our left hand. We always start with it in our left hand. And you always want to make sure that this little ridge of bumps is hanging down or pointing towards you. You don't want it pointing up this way. You don't want it pointing to the back. See, we don't want that. We always want to point it like towards us and down. So we're going to do the same thing we did last time. We are going to go in and up through the back, go between the needles, pinch it, and pull it out. And now the difference here is now that we've created our right stitch, we're going to scooch our stitches up our left needle, and that stitch we just went through on our left needle, we're going to slide it off. See? And so now we have a stitch. And so then we're going to do that again. We're going to go up from the front to the back, take our yarn between the needles and back, pinch against the right, pull it back through, slide the loop off the left. Up from the front, out to the back, between the needles and over the right, back out the way we came, and slide the loop off the left. Do it again, up and over, back the way we came. Now what you might notice is that is very tight and you're having to really force your needle through here. And that's really common when you're getting started because your tendency is you're going to pull this yarn really tight and you're going to pinch it really hard and you're going to hold it as tight as you can. And then what happens is you'll get really tight snug stitches, and that's not what we want. And it's going to take practice. So don't be afraid, that first row might be really, really tight. It might be really hard to get through. Take a deep breath, relax, shake your hands out. The looser you can keep your hands as you're doing this, the easier it's going to be. So you'll see how nice and loose my stitches are. Yours are probably not going to look like that at first, and that's okay. But we'll keep doing that. So you'll see up from the front, out the back, between the two, hold with the right, back the way we came. And so we'll just keep doing that. And so you'll see when you get used to it, it moves pretty quickly. And we will finish this guy out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit a couple rows of these, and then I'm going to show you all what it looks like when you, well, actually first, we'll finish this row. So now when you finish this row, you have an empty needle in your left hand and you have a full needle in your right. So what do? We switch them. So we turn it. We always want the needle tip pointing in towards, working together in front of us. We always want the ridges pointing down and towards us, right? And now we're ready to go again. And so we just start over and we go through and wrap around. And we just do that again and again. And so I'm going to pause this recording. I'm going to knit a couple rows and I'll show you what it looks like after you've done a few rows. Okay. And so what you'll see here is we've got about 6 rows knitted. You'll see it's nice and bumpy. You've got all these little ridges in here. Oh, I don't know if I can bring it closer without it going out of focus. All these little ridges in here. It's a nice squishy fabric. It's pretty thick. It looks the same on the front and the back. And so this is what it's going to look like if you knit every stitch. And now maybe you're like, okay, but that's not what the knitted things that I see like at the store or anything look like. And that's because they use a combination of the knit and the purl stitch. So in order to get that, we have to learn the next stitch. So we're going to learn our purl stitch next, and we're going to do that alongside it. So I broke my yarn on accident, so we're going to add a new strand. So again, we start with our project in our left hand hanging down. See how it's all hanging down nicely. And we are going to get ready for our purl stitch. So purl is going to be, it's basically the opposite of our knit stitch. So instead of going up from the front and out the back, we're going to go down from the back and out the front. Oh, my little yarn there is all kinds of busted. We're going to fix that guy. Okay, so like I said, the purl is basically the opposite of the knit stitch. So instead of going up from the front to the back like we do with knit, we're going to go down from the back and out the front with the purl. And then we're going to go, okay, and so down through the front, and then we're going to go up between them and around the bottom of our right needle. So see how it's like the opposite of our knit stitch? So we're going to go down through the front, we're going to go up between the two of them and down around the bottom of our right one. Gotta pull those guys snug. Okay, so down through the front, up around the two of them between the two needles, right, and down, whoop, around. I say focus on watching what I was doing. I forgot to watch the camera. And out. So down through the front, up between the two needles, and down around the bottom of the right. So you see I'm pinching it with my thumb this time. And then again, I'm going back out the way I came. Then I'm sliding the needle off, or the stitch off the left needle. So down through the front, up between the needles and around the bottom of the right, pinch it with my thumb, go back the way I came, my neighbor's cat just showed up, and slide the stitch off the left. And so we're gonna go ahead and do that a few times with cat. Sir. Excuse me, sir. This is not for you. Are you done? Are you done? Get out of here. Okay. He's back. Everybody say hi to Gizmo. We're not good at it. Okay. 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 I'm gonna try this without the cat. So let's try the purl again. So we're gonna do it down through the front, come up between the two needles, around the bottom, back the way we came, and pull the stitch off the left. So go ahead and do that again. Okay, so here we are at the end of my row, and we'll turn it around. You'll see it doesn't look a whole lot different yet, but if you look closely, you'll notice that rather than a bump here, I've got a little flat area. And this is what happens when we alternate a knit and a purl stitch, which I'll show you in a bit. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna purl again. So the important thing with purling is now that we've turned the yarn, see what happens if I leave my yarn hanging in the back and I go here and then I try to wrap it. People might come over, they might come under, and get all kinds of tangled. So when you're getting ready, you wanna make sure that you hold your yarn towards the front when you're ready to purl so that you don't get it all tangled or twisted. And then we go round and purl. Go down through, up above, and around the right, purl. Down through the front, up and around, and back the way we came. Down, up and above, back the way we came. There we go. So I'm gonna finish a couple rows of this, and then I'm gonna do alternating knit and purl and show you what it looks like. Okay, so I have knit a few rows, then purled a few rows, and then I alternated knitting and purling. And what you'll notice is that the purled everything doesn't look much different than the knit everything, right? But when you alternate them, that's where we start to get this nice smooth feel. That's because when we knit or purl every row, we're flipping back and forth. We're working on one side, then we're working on the other. And whichever side the yarn is on creates little bumps. So you see how I just finished a row and there's the yarn, and see all these little bumps from where we were making it? So that is based off of how we're wrapping the yarn around the needle. So when we alternate between knit and purl, we're always wrapping the yarn around the same side of the fabric. So we're always wrapping it around the back and creating those little bumps. So even though the project is switching around our left hand, right? So you'd see all the little bumps are facing me. That means I would be doing a purl row now, so that I would continue to have all the little bumps. Now, if I had done it the other way, all the smooth edges are just facing me. So I want the needle to go in the back. I don't want the yarn to wrap around the back because I want the bumps back there. Whichever side the yarn is wrapping around on is where the bumps are going to be created. So when we alternate knit and purl, what we're doing is we're making sure that the yarn is always wrapping around on the same side of our fabric to create those bumps and leaving the smooth side uniform. If you do all knit, you're flipping it back and forth, and so you're doing you're going across the right side and then the wrong side, and so you create this alternating of bumps, and so you get bumps on both sides of the fabric, which is called a garter stitch. So this is called a garter stitch. It's where you knit every row or purl every row. Here, where we have alternating rows of knit and purl, this is called stockinette stitch. And so these are the basics when you are looking to start knitting. You want to understand your knit stitch, your purl stitch, and the difference between garter stitch, which is where you do knit or purl for everything, and stockinette, where you do a knit row and then a purl row and you alternate back and forth. So this is how you get started with knitting. This is the basics on understanding your stitches. Now in the next video, what I will do is I will actually show you how to start working on some other techniques such as ribbing, which makes stretchy fabric for like cuffs or hats or socks. And then we'll start talking about some other basics such as how to make our project smaller or wider using decreases and increases.